Good morning, Dan, and Tribune's John Kass in for Amy this morning, and this is sort of a fun story. Hillary not getting the fees for speechifying she did once upon a time, John. She was at Rutgers over the late last week, and I don't think this is the bottom of the market for her honoraria, because you know how universities are. You know how profligate they are with other people's money. So I'd love to see what she could generate from, say, a Wall Street bank these days. But from Rutgers, only $25,000 for her speech last week. Gateway Pundit provided a nice little comparison. Snooki from Jersey Shore was paid $32,000 in 2011. So Hillary's looking up at Snooki these days when it comes to speaking fees.
Where's she going to end up, Hillary? Like
jail?
Doing a four round? She one of the four rounders, like in
Yeah.
like
well,
on the undercard.
Well,
the Angel Guardian gym. I mean, like, come on, Hillary.
Well, if you didn't think that was,
I saw that movie. It was with Anthony Quinn.
If you didn't think that this is interesting enough and satisfying enough, listen to Hillary Clinton's concern. She's very concerned about the future of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
But I do worry that what's happened to the Republican Party is that it's being held captive by a very small group of powerful forces.
Yeah.
We have seen the power of the NRA, for example.
Not in the audience to clap for that line was Ayan Hirsi Ali, who was disinvited. Was she No, she was disinvited from Brandeis. Was Condi Rice disinvited from Rutgers? Just disinvited to speak from Rutgers. So Condi Rice was not available to clap for Hillary there because she is not allowed to speak on campus.
Ali is a wonderful, brilliant woman. I've had the pleasure of interviewing her, and I think you have as well. And that would be something. She wouldn't waste her time.
Well, as I said, that's why Rutgers isn't going to be the bottom of the market for her speaking fees. But for speaking of those dark, shadowy forces holding the Republican Party captive, we're pleased to be joined by one now. He's Jed Babbin. He is former U.S. Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, now contributor to the Washington Times and the American Spectator. Jed, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks. I guess you guys just promoted me. I didn't know I was one of those dark forces.
I'm very
pleased to be, but you never know.
You never know when you're going to be folded into a Hillary Clinton conspiracy theory.
I've been there for a long time. I'm one of the original parts of the vast right-wing conspiracy. So
there you go.
That's okay.
I wanted to start by asking you about the violence and now unrest in Gaza after there was a showdown between Israeli military and Palestinian protesters, which resulted in the death of 15 of those Palestinian protesters. Of course, has unleashed more protesting as well as pronouncements and denunciations from American politicians in the direction of Israel, like Bernie Sanders.
Well, it's certainly not a surprise to see that coming from Mr. Sanders and a lot of the other left. Look, these are not protesters. They're rioters. They're members of or propped up by Hamas, the terrorist group that rules the Gaza Strip, and they're put out there to create incidents. We've seen evidence already of pre-filming, rehearsing of these rock-throwing incidents and so forth, and having shots fired at them by their own people to get them on camera. This is the typical thing that Hamas and some of the other Palestinian interests do. So I don't have any sympathy for them. They're trying to push out the border from the Gaza Strip, and the Israelis are properly resisting. So this is what's going to happen from time to time, and it's constantly there's never going to be a settlement of this until all of the Arab nations come together and force a settlement on the Palestinians.
I have a question for you, Jeb. The other day, the President of the United States made this pronouncement about Syria, saying, quote, "We're knocking the hell out of ISIS. We'll be coming out of Syria like very soon. Let other people take care of it now." When a president says something like that, given what's going on the ground and what's in the area, what do you guys in the defense, the analysts, the foreign policy analysts, what do you do? How do you deal with it?
Well,
Where's the first call? To Turkey to say, hey, he was just kidding? To Israel? Who do you call? You know?
yeah. Well, you don't call anybody, John. It's a good question, but the basic point is, Mr. Trump is right, although he usually doesn't say things the way they ought to be said. The fact of the matter is, we have no national security interest in Syria. The Russians and the Iranians and the Turks have dominated that battlefield now for years, and there really is not much reason for us to stay. The only reason for us to stay is to protect the Kurdish forces, which have fought alongside our people, and to enable them to withdraw back to their homeland in northern Iraq. That's the only reason for us to be there at this point, and quite frankly, the sooner they get out and we get out, the better.
So you're saying the Kurds have to leave. They have to get out of the place they fought for. Is that what you're saying?
Well, they're only
I think they might have a different view of that.
Well, they might, but then again, we can't protect them everywhere. We can and should protect them in their homeland, but they frankly were only there because we asked them to be there. I don't think they're going to want to have any more presence in Syria than we have, and they're probably just as anxious to get out as we should be. The Kurds were there to help us fight ISIS. They've done a terrific job, as they always do. Those Kurdish fighters are pretty awesome. And the fact is, we've done the job as best we can, and pretty much we've done it, period. So there's no national security interest in the United States there to defend and justify military presence.
How does that impact the refugee crisis? You've got hundreds of thousands in a Jordanian makeshift camp, as well as the potential for this to be resuscitated as an issue in America, right, in terms of the acceptance of Syrian refugees?
Well, I think that's going to affect it, continuously. You've seen a lot of the population, I forget the precise number, there's something like 20 or 30% of the population of Syria has already gotten out of that country,
right,
to try to avoid a almost 7-year-old war. So this is not really going to substantially affect that insofar as accepting refugees here. Quite frankly, we've done our part, and we don't need to do more. The president is right as well in looking at what's coming across the Mexican border in the next couple of days. We should not have to absorb every refugee from everywhere. And a lot of the people who are coming in from places like Mexico and El Salvador and so forth are not refugees, except in the sense of economics. They are fleeing a bad economy to try to come into our better economy, and that's no one's right. No one has a right to emigrate to the United States, period.
Speaking of that, you just alluded to it, President Trump tweeting over the weekend about immigration policy, border security, DACA. DACA is dead, he suggested. Also, he tweeted Mexico is doing very little, if not nothing, at stopping people from flowing into Mexico through their southern border and then into the U.S. They laugh at our dumb immigration laws. They must stop the big drug and people flows, or I will stop their cash cow, NAFTA, need wall, all caps, exclamation point. Is this one of the cases of the president being directionally right but not saying it properly?
Yeah, we can argue about the words, and, Mr. Trump has his own way with words, Lord knows, but he's right. The basic point here is NAFTA is a cash cow that the Mexicans and other nations have been taking advantage of us through, and, of course, they're not doing anything to stop any of the illegal immigrations coming across, and we have this 1,000-person caravan apparently coming from El Salvador, and the Mexicans are just holding up their hands and waving them along. There's really no reason for them to be cooperating in this, and there certainly is every reason for us to say we're not going to take these people. So one thing or another has to give, and the Mexicans are not giving at all. They're not trying at all to try to limit the immigrants coming across the United States border.
In recent, we see the news about John Bolton becoming the National Security Advisor. What do you make of it? And what do you make of his arguments about digital warfare, setting up conflicts in terms of digital warfare with some of our adversaries?
Well, I knew Mr. Bolton about 10 years ago when I was editor of Human Events, and let me tell you, he's not the devil incarnate. as I have a piece in the Wednesday Washington Times coming up to say this, I mean, Mr. Bolton is not going to walk into the White House with a to-do list, and the first thing is on it is create a nuclear war with North Korea. John is not crazy. He's not stupid. And he's very well experienced as an arms controller and in diplomacy. So what he's going to be doing is, I think, trying to establish a better agenda for the National Security Advisor. And I think he's going to be very close to Mr. Trump in things like the coming talks with North Korea. So insofar as cyber war, I mean, he's absolutely right. You've got General Nakasone taking over. I think he's being confirmed this week as head of National Security Agency and Cyber Command. And he's got a very tough thing ahead of him. Nakasone and John Bolton will be working, I assume, very closely to try to deal with the issues of Russian cyber war, Chinese cyber war, Iranian cyber war, and all of these tens of thousands of attacks that are made on our infrastructure every single day. So these are the kinds of things that can, at some point, rise to the status of an act of war when a cyber attack actually results in the deaths of people or a significant damage to infrastructure. That's an act of war. So things are going to be getting hotter and not colder in cyber war in that realm. And I know several of the people who are involved in it, and they're working very hard to protect our infrastructure and our defense and intelligence establishments. It's a very tall order, and it's not clear where we're going to be 5 years from now because, quite frankly, the other guys are just as good as we are.
With respect to Bolton and any possible meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, you suggest in your piece in The Spectator about Kim Jong-un's meeting with President Xi of China that there's no good that's going to come out of any talks or meeting with Kim Jong-un. So are you hopeful that Bolton talks the president back from meeting with Un?
No, I think that meeting with Kim is probably a good idea. But I think Bolton is going to be a leavening force, and you're not going to see the president come out of there with another bad deal like we had in the 1994 agreed framework the Clintons fell for. What we're going to see here, what we're seeing right now, is that China and South Korea and Japan are all sitting there shaking in their shoes trying to figure out what the heck are these two guys going to do when they get together, and they're trying to influence the talks before they come out, or before they begin, rather because none of them, China, South Korea, Japan, and quite a few other nations, none of them, I believe, have a lot of faith in either Trump or Kim Jong-un to make a decent deal. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on the president to make a deal, pretty much any deal. The left will want to have some sort of a deal come out of there, like the dangerous and ridiculous Obama nuclear weapons agreement with Iran. They're going to want to have something like that. But I think Mr. Bolton is going to, quite frankly, prevent that. And prevent the president from getting into a bad deal. So we'll see. No one really is sure what's going to happen. It's not even for sure that the meeting is going to happen. But I think it will, and it probably should.
He is Jed Babbin, former U.S. Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, contributor to the Washington Times and the American Spectator. We can read his most recent piece on the Xi-Un meeting and the forthcoming potential meeting with President Trump. Jed, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.